In this video, we're going to talk about all things index funds. We're going to talk about what an index fund is, why you might want to invest in an index fund, what to look for within an index fund, and then I'm going to tell you what the best index funds are, at least if you're using the Fidelity platform. But anyway, let's get right into it. All right? Whoosh. What's going on, people? It's your boy Fidelity back with another video. If this is your first time around these parts, hit that subscribe button. If you enjoy anything that we talk about on this video, hit that like button. Turn that thing, say with me now, blue. But anyway, in this video, we're talking about index funds. Maybe you just got started investing. Maybe you just opened a Roth IRA account and you're trying to figure out how exactly do I go about investing? Do I pick single stocks? Do I go with ETFs? I don't even know what any of these things are. Don't worry, I got you. Let's start with what is an index fund. My favorite website to figure out any what of these terms mean is Investopedia. And on Investopedia, it says an index fund is a type of mutual fund or exchange traded fund with a portfolio constructed to match or track components of a financial market index such as the S&P 500 index. Now, all of those words mean next to nothing to you or I. What it basically is a bunch of stocks within one thing. So instead of you trying to go buy Amazon and Apple and Facebook and Tesla and Google and Microsoft and all these companies, you can just buy an index, which the most important thing when it comes to investing is diversification. So by just buying an index, for example, the one is talking about the S&P 500, which is kind of the standard that we use for the stock market. The S&P 500, you can just buy an access to all of these stocks and be automatically diversified. And so you don't have to worry about, oh, I got to make sure I have exposure to this industry. I have to make sure I have exposure to that industry. Because when it comes to the stock market, what can usually happen is when one industry is doing bad, another industry can be doing really well, and this industry can help outweigh the negativity of this bad industry. So it helps your portfolio stay up rather than always dying whenever things happen. So that's why you want to use an index fund. Now, the reason why you might want to use it, especially if you're trying to open a Roth IRA or an individual retirement account, is an index fund is a lot more accessible within an IRA. An index fund, you're allowed to do something called fractional shares. This is where you can just kind of put a monthly amount into that fund and you can make it an automatic transfer and it's going to buy that amount regularly. You cannot really do this with single stocks, and you can't really do it with ETF within an IRA. And that's why I say to do an index fund. Within an IRA, you have to do index funds or mutual funds. And so I suggest going with index funds. So now that you understand the what and the why, let's talk about what you should be looking for while you're in an index fund. When you begin and you're trying to figure out what index should I invest in, what kind of index fund should I invest in, there's a few words that you need to know before you start getting into it. The first couple of words that you need to understand is the difference in weighting of a fund, or the difference in the type of companies that a fund might be investing in. So for example, you may see words like large cap. You may see words like mid cap. You may see words like small cap. And going back into Investopedia again, it tells us that a large cap company has a market capitalization of over $10 billion. A mid cap company has a market capitalization between $2 billion and $10 billion. And a small cap company has a less than $2 billion in market capitalization. Large cap companies usually have broader market insurance experience with greater access to capital markets. In general, large cap usually has the greatest trading liquidity. Basically, these are different weightings of how the market is looked at. So you have your large caps. Think of companies like Microsoft, like Apple, like Johnson & Johnson. These are established businesses that have massive reach. They make a lot of money and it's hard for them to move too much, but these are established. On the other side, you may have smaller companies like think of your Lemonades, your Airbnbs. Well, at this point, Airbnb has grown so fast, it's already a $100 billion company. But think of your smaller companies. Think of companies that are just starting out, your Pelotons, well, at this point, a lot of these companies have grown super fast in the last year and they've kind of flown out of being mid-cap companies. But the point is, these are smaller companies. These are a little bit more rising companies. These are companies that are trying to establish themselves. And then you have small caps companies that are just kind of getting off the roster. They're just trying to get started. It's usually what you find is there's a lot more risk with smaller and mid-cap companies because they don't have that established money-making machine just yet. You know what I mean? They're still learning how to operate their business and how to run things the proper way. And so the weighting can be very different. For example, if we go into Fidelity and just see like some of their examples of different funds, they have something called the Fidelity Zero Large Cap Index Fund. And basically what it is it seeks to provide investment results that correspond to the total return of a broad range of large capitalization U.S. companies. So large companies. So that's one. And then they have the Fidelity Extended Market Index Fund, which seeks to provide investment returns that correspond to the total return of a broad range mid to small capitalization U.S. companies. So if we take a look at the large cap stock or the large cap index fund, we'll see companies, like I said, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, the companies that you know very well and you've heard their names a lot. If we take a look at the extended market, the smaller cap, the small and mid cap companies, we see companies like Zoom, we see companies like CrowdStrike, we see companies like Pinterest, Match Group, Moderna, Teladoc, Etsy. So these are companies that are just starting to get on the roll. You know, they're just starting up. But the difference between the two is usually you have a lot more growth potential with your extended market index fund. You have a lot more growth potential with your mid and small cap stocks versus your large cap. You're not getting that much of growth, but you're also not getting that much of downside. They don't change or fluctuate that much. On the other side, the extended market, you're going to see a lot more volatility. So that's one thing that you look at. The second thing that you look at is within the fund, or the second word that you might want to look at is the word international versus domestic versus emerging markets. These are three descriptive words to tell you where the companies are that a fund is being invested into. So for example, if we look back in that large cap index fund, it uses the word domestic to describe itself, which means that the companies that it's investing into are all based in the United States. By the way, I am domestic. I'm based in the United States. I'm using Fidelity. For most people who are based in the United States, you're going to be able to access most of these things. That is going to be domestically based. And basically, that's what domestic means. It means companies that are based here in the United States. On the other hand, this also has another fund called the Fidelity Zero International Index Fund. In this fund, it's the international market. It's outside of the United States. So it has companies like Samsung. It has companies like Alibaba. It has companies like Nestle. It has companies like Toyota. Companies that you know about, but you need to invest in them outside of the United States. And this gives you access to those companies outside of the United States. As you know, sometimes the United States market is doing really, really well, and sometimes the international market does way better. So that's another word to keep in mind. And those are the two main words that you need to keep in mind whenever you're researching and trying to learn more about index funds. So the next thing that you want to look at when you start looking more deeply into an index fund is expense ratio. You want to make sure that when you're looking at index funds, you're paying very close attention to the expense ratio. It's very, very important. I know if you see an expense ratio and you think, oh, it's just 1%, let me just do a quick rundown of why expense ratios can make or break the difference in your investing portfolio. So let's say you are investing $10,000 initially. You start off with $10,000. You're contributing about $250 every month into that portfolio. You do this over a 40-year period and you have 10% return. That's what we've had historically in the stock market, about a 10% return. And let's say that you're paying a 1% fee to invest with that mutual fund or in that index fund. And let's calculate and see how much you would get. So after 40 years, you would end up with, without thinking about the 1% fee, you end up with $1,780,370. That is amazing. However, now let's look at what it would be if you had that 1% fee. With that 1% fee, you would actually end up with just $1.3 million versus $1.7 million that you can have possibly ended up with. That is a difference of over $300,000. Let me ask you, do you want $300,000 in your pocket? I'm pretty sure you're going to say yes. Now, if we do this again and we just do an expense ratio of 0.03, for example, let's do an expense ratio of 0.03. What do you end up with? 1.7 million. Basically the same thing, either 1.78 million or 1.76 million. It makes a massive difference, the amount that you're paying in fees. that makes all the difference. Just a 1% can make a massive difference because of compound interest. So it's very important, very, very important that you pay attention to the fees. The other thing that goes along with the fees that you have to pay attention to is turnover ratio. Turnover ratio tells you how often are companies being added and removed from this index fund. Because one thing that is important for me is when it comes to index fund, I just want it to be passive. And nowadays that was like a staple. It used to be like, oh, if you invest in an index fund, you're good. But now, because financial managers are always trying to twist words, always trying to get you to pay more for things, there are actively traded or actively managed index funds. And that's not what you're looking for. So you want to look at the turnover ratio to make sure that it's not higher than like 10% at the most, that they're not adding and removing stocks all the time, because that increases the tax burden on you and that increases the cost of you owning that index fund. So that's the third thing that you want to look at whenever you're looking at an index fund to invest in. The other thing that I suggest that everybody looks at is the historic returns of that index fund. If you're not doing an index fund that just tracks the S&P 500 or just tracks the global market as a whole, you're going to want to at the very least, compare that index fund to how the S&P 500 has done. For example, I pulled up another example of an index fund that they have on Fidelity. It's called the Fidelity Blue Chip Growth Fund. And it has companies that are very similar to what is in the Fidelity Zero Large Cap Fund. And so I just wanted to compare and say, first of all, you look at that expense ratio, 0.79. Although it doesn't seem that bad, if we go back to our calculator and we just go and say 0.79 based off the same return, you're losing almost $300,000 because of just that little difference of 0.79. It doesn't seem like much, but it actually accounts to much. So then it's like, if it's doing that, it has to be giving me a bunch more return in order to make up for the fact that I have to pay for this fee. So the thing you have to look at is what has been the 10-year return. So if we look at the 10-year return and we compare it, if you compare it just generally, if we use the large cap, this has given us a 15% return over the last 10 years, and we compare it to the 19% return. So in this case, it's done pretty well. This mutual fund or this index fund has done pretty well when you compare it to the S&P 500. But generally, that is not always the case. But just make sure that you're checking how the performance has been in the past. So finally, the last part of this video is just me telling you what I believe are the best Fidelity index funds to invest in, especially if you're trying to invest passively. There are 4 of them that Fidelity has and gives you access to. And the main reason that I like these is because as each one of them has a name, it's called the zero expense ratio funds. All of these ones do not charge you a dime, a cent for you to invest in them. And so I love it very much. If you look at the first one on here is the Fidelity Zero Large Cap Index Fund. In the Fidelity Large Cap Index Fund is basically the same as the S&P 500. It has the exact same companies as the S&P 500. In fact, I'm gonna pull up the Fidelity 500 Index Fund and we're just gonna compare when I switch pages if they look any different. Just keep your eyes on the companies over here. Just keep your eyes on the companies over here and see if you see any change. Do you see any change? There's barely any change. It's basically the same companies in both portfolios. They have the exact same holdings. So would you rather be paying 0.015 or would you rather be paying 0? I personally would rather be paying 0. So I would definitely suggest that if you want to invest, go through the Fidelity Zero funds. The Fidelity Zero funds are perfect. Now you have the 500 largest companies, and then you also have the extended market, whereas the mid and small cap. But if you want exposure to both of these, because this one would actually grow a little bit more than this one because it has a bit more volatility, I will go with the Fidelity Total Market Index Fund because it exposes you to companies in the United States, all companies in the United States. And then I'll also combine it with the Fidelity International Index Fund, which gives me exposure to companies overseas like Mercedes-Benz, like Toyota, like Samsung, some of the companies that we listed before. But that is the option of what I believe are the best Fidelity index funds. But anyway, that's all I got for y'all in this video. I hope you learned 1, maybe 2 things out of this entire thing. And if you did, hit that like button. If you loved it, hit that subscribe button. But I'm gonna catch y'all up on the next one. Remember, generosity is always greater than greed. God bless each and every single one of y'all, and I'm out. Peace. Whoosh.